highlighted part of the Gemara in the middle of Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. V'amar Rabba hiniach lo gachal ali bo v'meit patur. So if somebody leaves a coal on someone else's heart, and that person who had the coal placed on them, right? We mean a coal, C-O-A-L, a coal that holds heat and fire. If that causes someone else's eye, then the person who placed the coal there would be patur. Al bigdo v'nisraf chayav. But if somebody leaves a coal on someone else's piece of clothing and then the piece of clothing gets burnt, the person themselves is okay, but their clothing gets burnt, chayav. Then the person who placed the coal there would be obligated. Now, we're thinking for a second, wait a second. If I leave a coal on someone else and I cause them to die, didn't I kill them? Why am I not held responsible? So Rashi clarifies here, Ali bo v'meit patur, when we say that you left the coal on someone else's heart and they died, you're patur, because shahayalu l'salka, because the victim could have removed it. The person could have removed the coal. However, when we have the case of leaving the coal on your clothing, we say chayav, right, that the person who left the coal there is obligated. Dehadelo salka savar atvine le bedina v'yifrali. The person who, the victim, right, the person whose clothing got burned, we don't make him remove it here because he thought in that moment, I'm going to bring this other person to court, and there I'll get my payment. So the reason, right, in the first case, if somebody leaves a coal on their body that's going to cause them to die, we say, okay, if you left the coal on there, then you made the choice not to remove the coal, and that doesn't have any justification. You should have saved your life. But in the other case where your clothing got burnt, we could kind of justify, okay, maybe the person left the coal on their clothing not because they wanted their clothing to burn, right, and then that's it, but really because they figured, okay, it'll be easier for me to just let the clothing burn out, and then I'll bring the person who left the coal here to court. Amar Rava tarvaihu taninhi. So Rava says both of these cases that Rava brings up are each taught in a Mishnah. Alibo. So the case where the coal was left on the person's heart, that was already taught in this Mishnah, ditnan, as it was taught in the Mishnah, kivei shalav l'tocha or l'tocha mayim ve'eno yochol la'alot misham v'meit. Right. So if we have a case where somebody trapped someone inside, right, a furnace, a fiery room, or in water, right, they started to drown them, and the victim had no chance to escape, right, they were really being held there completely, then chayav, right, then the person who trapped them there is obviously chayav. Dachfo letocha or letocha mayim v'yachol la'alot misham v'meit pator. But if somebody, put someone else in danger by trapping them in a room with a furnace, or starting to drown them, but the victim had the ability to remove themselves from that situation, right? They had the opportunity and the ability to escape that, patur. Then the person who had initially put them in danger is actually patur from chayav mita. Big dough, and the case that Rabba had mentioned, where if you leave the coal on the person's clothing, then the person who left the coal is still chayav. Ditnan. We also see that that's proved in another Mishnah. Kara eksutai shiber at kadi chayav. So if somebody says to someone else, I want you to rip my clothing, right? Or I want you to break my vessel, then the person who broke it, the person who did the damage, is still chayav. You can't give someone permission like that to damage your property, with them actually getting away with it, unless al minat liftor. However, if the person who had said, rip my clothing, break my vessels, had also added, you can do this on condition that you will be patur, you'll be exempt from paying for it, patur. So then you would be patur actually. So right, Rava is quoting this Mishnah, which establishes for us that if I need to give someone explicit permission to the point where I tell them they're going to be patur if they do this damage. That's the only way for someone to be patur for doing damage to something else. However, if I don't give them explicit permission, just like in the case of letting the coal burn my clothing, then you would still be chayav to pay for it. Ba'e Rabba hiniach gachalat al livavdo mahu. Rabba now asks, well, we know what the deen is for, right, the case of leaving the coal on a person and for leaving the coal on property. What about a servant, right? A servant, on the one hand, is a person, right? They're a human being. On the other hand, there are aspects of a servant that make them like property, right? The owner has to take care of them and provide for them all of their human needs, but they still have some level of ownership under the owner. Kigufo dame o kimamono dame. So is this person like the owner himself, right? Like a person themselves, more similar to that, or is the eved, the servant, similar to property? Im timsalomar kigufo dame shoro mahu. Sorry about that, Belle. If you want, you can say that if you want to say that an eved is like a person, right? We treat the eved like the master, meaning since the eved is a person, we'll give the same deen. Shoro mahu. Then we would have to ask the same question about an ox now, right? Because an ox, on the one hand, is property, it belongs to the owner. However, on the other hand, it's a living thing. Hadar pashta avdo kigufo sharoku kamamono. So Rabba comes back and says, he returns and says that it's obvious, it's simple. A servant is like the master. He's considered just to be a person who has the same deen as any other person, and an ox is like property.